Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Elizabeth. I'm an alcoholic, and today we're starting on page 5, Bill's story. I'm going to read a little bit and then share, and then at quarter till, we'll open it up for questions and discussion. Then I got a promising business opportunity. Stocks were at the low point of 1932, and I had somehow formed a group to buy. I was to share generously in the profits. Then I went on a prodigious bender, and the chance vanished. I woke up. This had to be stopped. I saw I could not take so much as one drink. I was through forever. Before then, I had written lots of sweet promises, but my wife happily observed that this time I meant business. And so I did. Shortly afterward, I came home drunk. There had been no fight. Where had been my high resolve? I simply didn't know. It hadn't even come to mind. Someone had pushed a drink my way, and I had taken it. Was I crazy? I began to wonder, for such an appalling lack of perspective seemed near being just that. Renewing my resolve, I tried again. Some time passed, and confidence began to be replaced by cocksureness. Cocksureness. Oh, I always thought it was had a D in it. Never mind, sorry. I could laugh at the gin mills. Now I had what it takes. One day I walked into a cafe to telephone. In no time, I was beating on the bar, asking myself how it happened. As the whiskey rose to my head, I told myself I would manage better next time, but I might as well get good and drunk then, and I did. I'm going to stop there for a minute, and Bill, you can jump in after me. You know, I have seen this so many times with people that leave and come back to AA. You know, they're like, "Oh, I'm doing this. I got this. I'm good. I don't need AA. I've got what it takes now." You know, and they go back out, and you can see this. Something just happened. Hold on 1 second. Where's Bill? Sorry, there's some noise in the background.
I'm at the paint store, Elizabeth.
It just came on. I don't know why it came on. Anyway, guys, hold on 1 second. Sorry about that. Okay. But then, you know, we come up with some excuse, right? Or something happens. How many times you see somebody who's on 3 days sober and they got to go to some family event, you know, and they think they're good and they don't do anything to prepare, you know, for the possibility that temptation is going to be put right in their face, right? And then, oh, there we go. Oh, you know, and then might as well get drunk, right? I'm not even going to try to control it. Some people call it the F it button gets pushed, you know, and I see that a lot. Let's see. Let me see if there's anything else I want to say on that. And I love where he says, "Was I crazy?" When I was drinking, I remember these little moments that I would have. You know, one time I don't know if did I tell this story in this meeting where I ended up on top of a fence and I couldn't get down. You know, I thought I needed to climb this fence to go move my car. I was wasted and I was on my way home. And I got trapped at the top of this fence. It was the kind that had the wire that had a hook at the top, and my necklace was caught and my jeans were caught, and I was up, and I have one arm and one leg on either side of this fence, and I'm on top of it. And I had this moment where I thought, what am I doing? You know, all those little times, like I had those happen a few times here, like my behavior, what I've been doing. But now in my case, I didn't know it was drink that was the problem, you know, that because I drank, I never saw the connection until I got to AA. I didn't know why I was making such poor decisions and always seemed to be drunk. Everyone around me was drunk too. So I hadn't passed that age, right? I was still, 19 at that time, and everyone drank like I did that was around me. You know, I meet people now who are in their later 20s or, you know, getting to be 30, early 30s, and now they're the only one drinking like they are. You know, no one around them's drinking that way anymore because other people have matured out of that phase. You know, they're not doing that. The remorse, wait, Bill, I will wait for Bill. The remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. The courage to do battle was not there. My brain raced uncontrollably, and there was a terrible sense of impending calamity. I hardly dared cross the street, lest I collapse and be run down by an early morning truck, for it was scarcely daylight. An all-night place supplied me with a dozen glasses of ale. My writhing nerves were stilled at last. A morning paper told me the market had gone to hell again. Well, so had I. The market would recover, but I wouldn't. That was a hard thought. Should I kill myself? No, not now. Then a mental fog settled down. Gin would fix that. So 2 bottles and oblivion. I absolutely love the remorse, horror, and hopelessness of the next morning are unforgettable. And I remember that feeling. I remember waking up the next morning and thinking, what did I do last night? Did I do it again? Oh, I did it again. I did it again. And just feeling dirty, ashamed, terrified, wondering who saw me. Does anyone know what I did? And yeah, I mean, I remember that like it was yesterday. I remember everything about it, sitting on the floor. We still had those telephones that were attached to the wall with really long cords. So that's what I had in my dorm room at college. And I probably called somebody and I probably figured out a way to go get high right away. I wasn't I day drank when it was spring break or a football game, but marijuana is part of my story, and it was a good way to start earlier so I didn't have to feel so I didn't have to feel the bad feelings about the way that I was acting and what I was doing. But I love too where he says, alcohol's going to fix it again. And he tried it again, you know. And Bill, when you get to the point where you can come and comment on all this, I hope you do. The mind and body are marvelous mechanisms, for mine endured this agony 2 more years. When he says that, the mind and body are marvelous mechanisms for mind endured, I think that for me, and still in sobriety, my brain can hide things from me all the time. I'm not going to see it. If I see it, I might have to change. And I do this in sobriety. I can do that. It's not just alcohol. The idea that I don't want to see what I'm going to have to change. I have a million ways to endure making myself be able to do what I want to continue to do. I'm going to find a million reasons why. I'm going to tell myself I can do this. And I think the mind, somewhere it says that, the complete description of the alcoholic is outside the scope of this book. There's other stuff you can read. Harry Tiebout is great to read about the alcoholic mind, and the ego is really fascinating. He says, sometimes I stole from my wife's slender purse when the morning terror and madness were on me. Again, I swayed dizzily before an open window or the medicine cabinet where there was poison, cursing myself for a weakling. There were flights from city to country and back as my wife and I sought escape. Then came the night when the physical and mental torture was so hellish I feared I would burst through my window sash and all. Sometimes I managed to drag my mattress to a lower floor lest I suddenly leap. A doctor came with a heavy sedative. Next day found me drinking both gin and sedative. This combination soon landed me on the rocks. People feared for my sanity. So did I. I could eat little or nothing when drinking, and I was 40 pounds underweight. Bill, you want to chime in on some of this? You able to yet?
Actually, to be honest, I like the no affiliation. When he starts administering high-powered sedative intravenously and smoking rock cocaine, I'm going to jump right in.
Wait, you got muted.
I know. I'm letting you handle the drinking portion.
Okay, okay. Are you don't want to say anything more about that whole page?
Listen, I've been in my car. I got to get in the house now.
All right.
Clear that off the recording, Rob.
Okay, so he mentioned that he mentioned sedative, and you said something about I was grabbing my reader. Something about no affiliation.
It says at the beginning we are not affiliated with AACA, CODA, or any of the like. So I said, I'm going to wait till you get into the high-powered sedative portion. And when he was smoking rock cocaine, I knew a lot about that.
Yeah. Well, Somebody told me once, yeah, we're not affiliated with anything here, so we can talk about whatever, which is great. Nice freedom for sure. But I'm definitely an ANDA. That's what they call them, ANDAs, right? Alcoholic and I don't know. I haven't explored I've switched to marijuana as a way to control my alcohol use, though. I'm pretty clear on that. Let's see. My brother-in-law is a physician, and though his kindness and that of my mother was placed, sorry, let me put these readers on. I'm like right on the edge of needing readers to read the big book, and it's annoying as hell. And through his kindness and that of my mother, I was placed in a nationally known hospital for the mental and physical rehabilitation of alcoholics. Under the so-called belladonna treatment, my brain cleared. Hydrotherapy and mild exercise helped much. Best of all, I met a kind doctor who explained that though I was certainly selfish and foolish, I had been seriously ill, bodily and mentally. It relieved me somewhat to learn that in alcoholics, the will is amazingly weakened when it comes to combating liquor, though it often remains strong in other respects. My incredible behavior in the face of a desperate desire to stop was explained. Understanding myself for now, yeah, man, I fared forth in high hope. For 3 or 4 months, the goose hung high. I went to town regularly and even made a little money. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. Remember too, again, when this book was written in the 30s, they had no understanding of alcoholism as an illness or disease. I now hear there's questions about that word, but they're talking about, why can't somebody just stop? That was just completely unknown. And people are like, why don't I have the willpower to stop? This sentence really helped me. Surely the answer was self-knowledge. When I was 21 and got sober and I first read this part of the book, I thought maybe I'm not an alcoholic. I didn't go through all that, right? I found myself in other parts of the book more, just because I never tried to quit and found that I couldn't. But I did reach a place in my recovery when I was 14 years sober, where I was in a really bad relationship that I couldn't seem to leave. I had read all the books. It was like dating my mom, basically. The dynamic was exactly the same. I was desperate for somebody to tell me how special and important I was, and this person managed to do that. That was called love bombing. He was verbally abusive. And I remember Bill, pounding his fists on the bar saying, how did this happen again? And the self-knowledge and this statement really helped me then. And that's when I met my big book sponsor, the woman who led me through this program and taught me what this is about, what I'm here to treat. Because I was managing my life very poorly, very, very poorly at the time. But I remember this thinking, what is wrong with me? I've read all these books. I read John Bradshaw, Melody Beattie, and I've done codependency treatment. I've done all this stuff. How come it's not enough? Why did I end up here again? Why do I keep going back to this person? Because they keep telling me what I want to hear. And I was crying and I looked at my arm and I thought, I feel like I'm trying to use an arm I don't have. And I thought of the word powerless. That is what led me to my knees to seek help to develop my relationship with God. And that's why I often share it in my story. That's because I had 14 years of sobriety at that time, and as long as I had meeting-based sobriety. As long as I went to a lot of meetings, I was okay. And if I stopped, I wasn't okay. But I think about this. Surely this was the answer, self-knowledge. Thank God I had enough of an acquaintance with what's in this book that I knew that the program had the answer for me, that it would solve my problem. And at that time, it was a management problem. It wasn't an alcohol problem. It was something else that I was using to try to fix me. Anyway, Bill, now that you're back, do you want to talk on some stuff here? No? All right.
Yeah, give me 2 minutes.
All right, you. And that's the other thing I hear from people a lot about the will is weakened when it comes to alcohol, but it's strong in other respects. I mean, a lot of people that pointing that out is helpful to them. They're like, well, I don't understand. I can do all this other stuff. Well, so can I. I've run a business. It failed eventually, by the way, and we have an ego story on that one. But I've raised kids. I've taken care of myself all my life. I've self-parenting, blah, 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 right? Why can't I hear? And I'm glad that they included that statement in the book because people need to hear that, right? I'm so powerful, self-sufficient, I can do all this stuff. Nope, sorry. We got something going on with us that makes us unable to stop drinking. So self-knowledge, surely this was the answer. It says, but it was not. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I can't tell you how many people I sponsor. Well, I don't end up sponsoring them, actually. I end up not sponsoring them when they're not doing anything. But I ask them when I first start working with them, do you think you can stay sober on your own? And what do they tell me? No, they can't, right? That's why they're here. The reason I ask them that statement is because later on, after we've talked about the triangle and the actions that we take in all three sides, and they're not doing it, and they don't have a home group, they don't have a service position, they're not doing step work, and they're not helping anybody, and they're not praying, they're not using the tools in their lives, I remind them of this. You said you couldn't stay sober on your own. And if you're not taking the actions, that's what you're doing. You're trying to stay sober on your own, with the knowledge. And I have to look at that too. I did something the other night where I didn't do the pause and I really embarrassed myself. I started explaining something to someone who had training in it. It was really interesting. She didn't tell me until after I was done explaining it to her. And I realized I just plowed forward in this conversation without remembering that sometimes I need to stop trying to impress people and think I know everything and just stop and let them talk and have space in the conversation. And it's because I'm a talker, if you can't tell, and just see what's going on there. It was a little bit, even a touch of shame came in there. Let me just tell you, it was not fun. I mean, it was like, okay, I feel really stupid here, wow. It was funny. I have to remember that, I have tools to use, and one of them is to have a pause. One of them is to run things past people. One of them is to sit and listen, and assess the situation. My husband's really good at that. I'm not. I'm the one that plows forward, right? He watches me and laughs sometimes. He's like, there she goes. All right. Chrissy, can I invite Chrissy to co-chair this with me today, Bill? If you're not going to participate.
I'm running it, so I'm home.
Okay, do you want to take over too? Do you want to
You
talk
want
on
to start
some stuff?
reading?
Yeah.
You stopped at the bottom of 7, the very last paragraph, correct?
Nope. Self-knowledge. I stopped on.
Okay. You didn't get past that. What page is it?
But it
Page
was
7.
not on page 7.
But it was
Page
not.
7. Yeah, but that's what I said, the last paragraph, okay. But it did not, for the frightful day came when I drank once more. The curve of my declining moral and bodily health fell off like a ski jump. After a time, I returned to the hospital. This was the finish, the curtain, it seemed to me. My weary and despairing wife was informed that it would all end with heart failure during delirium tremens, or I would develop a wet brain, perhaps within a year. She would soon have to give me over to the undertaker or the asylum. They did not need to tell me. I knew and almost welcomed the idea. It was a devastating blow to my pride. I, who had thought so well of myself and my abilities and my capacity to surmount obstacles, was cornered at last. Now I was to plunge into the dark, joining the endless procession of sots who had gone on before. I thought of my poor wife. There had been much happiness after all. What would I not give to make amends? But that was over now. No words can tell the loneliness, the despair I found in that bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I was overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. I think that's like pretty much the bottom, huh? The emotional state of hopelessness. I understand that feeling. I got to the end of the road and it didn't seem like there was any way from there to here. I do want to mention when he had that promising business opportunity, and after that, his friends had gotten him into a contract. Is that right? Did we read that part where he signed the contract where he was remained in business? They joined a Trinity. Anyhow, in one of these stories, which I don't believe we read last week, so we had to have read it today, I had read the history of it. And what had happened is a guy came and got Bill Wilson and hired him for his ideas. There was a guy with money, and then there was a guy with connections. So they entered into a contract and said, Bill, we understand that you have a problem with alcohol, and if you touch so much as one drop, the contract is broken. And Bill said, as he signed the contract, he let out a sigh. He said, it's finally over. He believing that this position that was going to change his life financially was sufficient to overcome his obsession with alcohol. And then it says, it talks about him going they sent him out to look over, I think, a moving picture at the time or a camera, something like that. And what happened is they started to pass around this bottle of Jersey Lightning, which was something, I don't know what it was, but it had alcohol in it. And he said the first 2 times they passed it around, they were gambling in a room playing cards, and they asked him if he wanted to play. And he said, that has no appeal to me. And they thought that was odd because he was like a trader, so they thought that there would be gambling in his blood. And he said out came the bottle, and they passed it around. He said, I easily turned it down the first time, and it came around the second time, and I said, no, that's not for me. And he said, all of a sudden he entered into a trance. And all of a sudden, every form of alcohol that he had ever drinking, he describes were like troops marching through his mind. And when it came around the third time, he said, well, I never tasted Jersey White Lightning. What could it hurt? And he said, as soon as it hit his belly, from his lips to his belly, he said, I knew the contract was broken. And what happened then is they put the first one inside of him, and then he lost the contract and went on this, where we're at to now. So I just thought it was an interesting story, the way he describes it. It's a fascinating book, Bill W., my first 40 years, because he really is descriptive of what alcoholism had a hold on him, both mentally, physically, emotionally, morally, spiritually. And I guess this kind of lines up where it talks about we will know loneliness as few people do. We'll be at the jumping off place and wish for the end. I think maybe the saddest thing about alcoholism is when we get to that point, it just seems like the end doesn't come. And we live in that state until the grace of God happens. And most alcoholics drink themselves to death, long beyond that point of the hopelessness in the mind. Because like he said, the body and mind are marvelous mechanisms. He's enjoyed that for 2 more years, me on and off for about 40. So there you go. Your turn.
I like how he says that his moral and bodily health fell off like a ski jump, because I see that happen when people drink again. It's very, very fast. I heard of a guy, he was 29 years sober. He wasn't active in AA, and he hurt his ankle, and his friend did not have any ibuprofen or aspirin or anything, but he had tequila. And he had that suddenly. That seemed like a good idea. And it went okay, so he did it again. And it went okay, so he did it again. Within 3 weeks, he was back to being as bad as he ever was, or worse. And he told me that story, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard that it's 3 weeks is a very common statement that people have made, that they were back to as bad as they were. But that lie, it's like, oh, I'm good, I don't have to do that. And then I love the I, who had thought so well of myself and my ability of my capacity to surmount obstacles. I remember that, and I got to AA mainly because of the shame of my behavior when I was drinking, that I couldn't control what I was doing, and I did things that I wouldn't have done sober. In fact, I was just talking to somebody about some stuff regarding that. and it became such a big thing in my life, right? It was just, it was like, if I was doing well anywhere, that sort of got erased because the entire focus became how bad I felt about myself, the fear that I felt, the walking, everything that alcohol had given me, the ability to talk to people, look at people, was now gone, right? It turned like a boomerang and all but cut me to ribbons as a little bit earlier. That happened for me because now I can't look at people. Now I'm going to school and they're saying, "Hey, Elizabeth, how are you?" And I'm thinking, how do they know me? What did they see? And I feel that feeling of dread and fear instead of anything positive. And this became such a big thing in my life. And I kept asking myself, what is wrong with me? I had no idea that it was alcohol. I literally didn't know that it was alcohol. I didn't know what was going on, and I didn't find out until I came to AA and heard you all talking about it. I mean, I'm in Kentucky, dude. We're in bourbon country here. Everybody drinks. It's a drinking culture here. And I know some of you are in places like that, so you just don't know. And I just, God, when, some of the parts of the book, like no words can tell, of the loneliness and despair I felt in that bitter morass. Have we read that yet? Sorry, I'm looking at it. Bitter morass of self-pity, quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I had been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. Now, like I said, I didn't directly see that alcohol was my master, but I got to a place where I called my father and I asked him for help. I again did something I promised myself I wasn't going to do. I cheated on my boyfriend again. That's kind of what happened for me when I was, in that world of that just crazy mixed up world. I was doing things that I told myself I would never do again. And here I was doing it again. And I finally just started talking to my dad, and he said, well, I didn't tell him what I was doing. I didn't tell him any of the stuff that was going on. But I said, I don't know if I should break up with my boyfriend. And he said, why don't you go to Al-Anon? And that's when I heard people talking about the drinkers in their lives. And I thought about the fact that I had the mental obsession because I thought about using all day. And I knew I couldn't be high or drunk for Al-Anon. Somehow I knew that would probably be a bad idea. Probably shouldn't turn up to an Al-Anon meeting drunk and high. So I sat there and I thought, wow, maybe I have the mental obsession my dad told me about, And what's weird is I wasn't talking to my dad a lot then. We saw him on Sundays pretty much our whole lives. I mean, he got one day a week. Back then that's what dads got, right? Divorced dads. They didn't have a lot of time with their kids. And it's just weird that I ended up talking to him. And I've seen that again and again in my recovery. And I think that's my higher power, right? Taking me to where I need to be, giving me that little, because that's how I met my sponsor. I wasn't even supposed to be where I was when I met her. The one that really taught me this program. But I just so many times in the book, I can't believe how beautiful the writing is from this stockbroker dude, right? Like he writes beautifully. Bitter morass of self-pity. I was a queen of self-pity, right? But yeah, that last sentence, I just didn't know why. I just didn't know what was going on. But I'm glad I asked somebody. That's it. You want to do some more reading?
Sure.
Okay.
Trembling, I stepped from the hospital a broken man. Fear sobered me for a bit. Then came the insidious insanity of that first drink. And on Armistice Day, 1934, I was off again. Everyone became resigned to the certainty that I would have to be shut up somewhere or would stumble along to a miserable end. How dark it is before the dawn. In reality, that was the beginning of my last debauch. I was soon to be catapulted into what I like to call the fourth dimension of existence. I was to know happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. Near the end of that bleak November, I sat drinking in my kitchen. With a certain satisfaction, I reflected there was enough gin concealed about the house to carry me through that night and the next day. My wife was at work. I wondered whether I dared hide a full bottle of gin near the head of our bed. I would need it before daylight. Fear sobered him for a bit. And it was interesting because on Armistice Day, there was a great story. Bill had been sober a few months and it had coerced Lois into letting him go for the last time of the year golfing at his brother-in-law's country club. And she didn't want to, make it seem like she didn't believe in him. She thought it was a bad idea, but she went along and let him go. And he was on a bus at the time, or a trolley car, and he met this guy on there who had a rifle. And since Bill knew something about skeet shooting and rifles, it struck up a conversation. And as they talked and they had some time to talk, Bill began to describe himself as one of those people who couldn't drink. Well, all of a sudden the trolley car got in an accident, and before they're waiting for another one to come pick them up, they walked into a place, they called it a speakeasy, I guess, something like that, saloon, where they served food, kind of like our friend Jim, a roadside place. And they ordered a sandwich each, and the guy ordered a drink, and of course Bill refused it and continued to tell him how bad alcohol had destroyed his life. And when they got to the country club, Bill's tee-off time was in an hour, and the guy's shooting time was in a half an hour. So they went in and sat down at the bar. The guy ordered a drink, and Bill continued to talk to him. And all of a sudden, it says, the bartender came up. The war was over. He said, in commemoration of Armistice Day, here's a drink on the house. And it said, Bill said, I picked that up and drank it as carelessly as ginger ale. Prior to this, he said, my new friend looked at me like I was a genius. And he said, all of a sudden, when I took the drink, he said, my newfound friend got a look on his face where he didn't think I was too bright. And he said, sir, after what you have told me alcohol's done to your life and you just drank it, you must be crazy. And Bill said, I am insane. And I also think about this. If December 10th to 12th is Bill's last day of drinking, and he picked up the first drink on November 11th, he went on a 30-day drunk. I meet a lot of people coming into AA, and Zoom's wonderful, and I see them in the rooms, but I have not in a long time, seen an alcoholic that was drinking, and once they lit the fuse, continued to drink around the clock for 30 days. I've heard a lot of them say they do, but there's not a lot of evidence. And I'll tell you what, when you're at that point, you're in the chronic, progressed, final end stages of alcoholism. And again, it was another failure from the time that he was at the bottom. He had stayed sober based on what he could fear, whatever it was. And now the end is near. But I was thinking about, because I know the way the rest of the story goes, and thought that's the grace of God when someone intervened at that point, because I'm quite certain if he carried on, he would have drank himself into insanity or death. So, you want me to you want Ebby to come in yet, or do you want to talk about what we just described anymore?
I'd like to say, I really love how he says, I was soon to be catapulted, and he says, happiness, peace, and usefulness in a way of life. There it is again, way of life. This isn't just something I do for 1 hour a day. This isn't just about not drinking. It's a way of life. And I love catapulted. I was soon to be catapulted into this life. When I live this life, I've shared a story. Something happened in my family of origin on Christmas Eve that just had me in a funk for the first 6 weeks of the year. And one day I woke up, and of course the thoughts were on me. It was like, boom, hey, and then I started thinking, how can I change this? How can I tell them? How can I, and I'm really angry at my mom, and I'm going to write her a letter, and my brain is just going, and I'm also at the same time beating myself up saying, that's never worked. What are you doing? Like the two voices are talking to each other in my head. And I thought, this sucks. This is really painful. And it suddenly occurred to me, I know a young woman who's brand new who wants to read chapter 3 together. She asked me, will you read with me? Because she don't want, she can't make herself read on her own. By the way, if you're one of those, ask somebody to read with you. They will, hopefully. And if they don't, come talk to me. I'll either read with you or find someone who will. And so I contacted her. She was free. She was available, and we started reading. And within a couple of minutes, I'm sitting there looking I just adore this woman too. I just love her. I want her to get sober and have all of the good stuff. I'm looking at her and I'm thinking, that only took a couple minutes, and my whole world has just changed. I'm happy. I'm with her. We're reading this book. I'm no longer in this horrible place where I'm thinking about all this stuff that I wish was different, and it's not. So when I think about that, and that was like, right, boom. But I have to be willing to take that action and know, I have the knowledge now that action will work. So I need to take it, And when I was early, I had like this, I sort of called it my internal drill sergeant, You know what a drill sergeant is? They're the one that's like, drop and give me 50 push-ups, And when I didn't want to go to a meeting, in my brain, it would say, you need to go, and luckily I listened to that and I did it. Let me see. And, my way of life that is incredibly more wonderful as time passes. I have hardships. I have grief. I have loss. Those things happen, but I don't have to dwell on them. I don't have to stay focused in this place where pain becomes misery, because I can be out of it by practicing every day what this program suggests that I practice in my life. And that keeps this, anchor in AA, that even when things are really hard or something's going on, and when in my home group, when people try to quit service, it's really fun. It's online, right? Because you see, they'll tell you, hey, don't schedule me for service, or they leave the WhatsApp group and you see, and we'll say, well, what's going on? Oh, I got all this. And I say, well, that's the time to have more service, not less, and be able to carry that message and tell them, like, keep this, this foundation in recovery, in every way that you can for when the hard times come. And I do have a happiness, peace, and usefulness today in a way that helps me get through any times that are hard. All right, that's it. Do you want to read, or do you want me?
I'd like to read what Rob put in the chat. I think it's very interesting because Bill describes what he was referring to, and I had not seen that. And I mean, that pretty well takes away from us defining that. He pretty well talks about what he was referring to. And when he says, Bill refers to the fourth dimension, says, what I really meant was this, that I was catapulted into a spiritual experience, which gave me the capability of feeling the presence of God, his love, and his omnipotence, and most of all, his personal availability to me. Of course, this is the ABC of the conversion experience, something as old as man himself. So maybe an awareness of God and some sense of relationship to him constitutes a fourth dimension. At least this was true for me, one who had no belief of such sensibility, whatever. I hope this clears the things for you. I just made it too hard, I guess. And I mean, how else, Rob, how else would he have made it? He had an experience he could not otherwise explain, where the room lit up. He thought he was losing his mind if it wasn't real. And he called Silkworth in. You know what I mean? What a great moment that was. And the good news is, even after he had this Apostle Paul conversion, or Moses seeing the fire, the great light that appeared on the horizon, even so, after that experience, he was still waved by plagues of self-pity and depression, because the experience was just that, an experience. But it was sufficient. The experience was sufficient that when he got to that point, he realized the same thing that he realized in the Mayflower Hotel, that he must find another alcoholic to talk to, not even so much for the obsession to drink, but how about when my defects of character, like Elizabeth was talking about, begin to dominate me, when self becomes such a veritable plague and I can't get rid of it on my own. Intensive work with other alcoholics will always save the day. Even if it does nothing but stop me from imposing self on the rest of the world, I can impose something on the newcomer and something good can become of it. So that's an interesting reading. Thank you for describing that. The presence of God and our ability to personally relate to him describes what he calls the fourth dimension of existence, and what a gift that is for us.
And what's so cool is when you look at the triangle, the recovery, unity, and service, you can compare that to mind, body, and spirit. And the spirit side is the service side. Some people say helping others is part of unity. Some people say it's part of service. I mean, you can get forensic with that, but what I described when I was sitting with that woman, right? I felt that presence of God and his love, because here I am with a woman in North England reading a book, and I have been, my whole existence got changed within those moments. My whole reality of my experience of life got changed because I did that. And when they say that faith without works is dead, that's how it's been for me. I can't just sit around and think about God and feel something. I have to be out there helping someone. That's how, that's been true for me. I love that. So we're going to talk about it here in a minute. 14 and 15, right? We're going to get there here in a bit. And whenever we get there, but I love that. I feel the presence of God, his love and his omnipotence when I am just sitting there in awe that I have a relationship with somebody in a part of the country. I've actually visited. I've actually been through Carlisle. It was Carlisle, UK. Been through their train station anyway. I switched trains there. But that's amazing to me, and I was sitting there feeling just awesome, just looking at her reading and just like, wow, this is amazing, and this life I get to have. So I love how he explained that. Thank you, Rob, for that. I saved that. I'm going to read it again after the meeting. I really love that because, yeah, what does it mean exactly? Thank you. Go ahead, Bill. Or are we on? What time?
We are off.
Yeah.
Okay. Near the end of that bleak November, I sat drinking in my kitchen. Oh, I read that, right? Okay. My musing was interrupted by the telephone. The cheery voice of an old school friend asked if he might come over. He was sober. It was years since I could remember him coming to New York in that condition. I was amazed. Rumor had it that he had been committed for alcoholic insanity. I wondered how he had escaped. Of course, he would have dinner and then I could drink openly with him. Unmindful of his welfare, I thought only of recapturing the spirit of other days. There was that time we had chartered an airplane to complete a jag. His coming was an oasis in this dreary desert of futility. The very thing, an oasis. Drinkers are like that. The door opened and he stood there, fresh-skinned and glowing. There was something about his eyes. He was inexplicably different. What had happened? I pushed a drink across the table. He refused it. Disappointed but curious, I wondered what had gotten into the fellow. He wasn't himself. Come, what's all this about? I queried. He looked straight at me, simply but smilingly. He said, I've got religion. I was aghast. So that was it. Last summer, an alcoholic crackpot. Now I suspected a little cracked about religion. He had that starry-eyed look. Yes, the old boy was on fire, all right. But bless his heart. Let him rant. Besides, my gym would last longer than his preaching. I think we should stop there, right?
Yeah.
And Rob, did you put the chartered airplane in the chat? If not, I know you will, right?
I can, yeah. It's a beautiful story, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a crazy story because it was the first flight at that airport or on that airline.
No, it wasn't.
Oh, was it the first one?
It wasn't the first one. But one of the interesting facts is that Bill sent an apology letter to the lady there. He didn't know what he had done, but he sent an apology letter, which is in the chat right now, a copy of it. So, a fascinating story.
Yeah.
Just to think about having all that much money that, just sitting around and, there's a pilot over there. Let's hire him. He'll fly us out there.
There was some celebration going on, and what happened at the landing field is I don't know what it was, but it was a marching band or some celebration was going on. And they coerced the pilot to boom, and they fell out of the plane drunk when they got off. I guess they didn't make a good impression.
Seems hard to believe, doesn't it?
Yep. Go ahead, Elizabeth. You can talk about the Oasis.
No, I don't have any comments on this, and I think it's time we open up for questions and shares. Anything? So this
I'm
part
all
of
for it.
this part of the meeting, you guys. If you guys want to share back anything that your own experience about the reading, or anything, if you have any questions, or if your experience is different, you want to share about it. Go ahead, Diana.
Hi everyone, I'm Diana. I'm an alcoholic. So glad to be here with you guys. I love this meeting, and I'm very new at this, so please just forgive me because I'm very new. But yeah, Bill's story at first, it's funny because so as I'm reading this book and so the doctor's opinion, and when I read it with someone like a year ago, I was like, oh my god, it's my favorite chapter. And I never was. I was like, I always hated reading that part of the book. And then it came to Bill's story. I'm like, oh, I hate reading Bill's story. But now I'm like, this is so amazing. Because yes, of course, first and foremost, the alcohol and drugs are my problem. But today, for some reason, I'm reading it in a different way, in a way with my codependency and my unhealthy attachments, in a sense. And it was very helpful with your shares that, like, you kind of were relating to that as well, in a sense. Like, you had talked about relationship, like it really resonated with me today. So thank you all so much for your service and being here, and I love you guys. Thanks. Oops.
Thank you, Diana. Anybody else?
Everybody else.
Go ahead. Is it Brissy? Brizzy? You can correct me.
Yeah, I'm an alcoholic. My name's Brizzy. Thank you, Bill. I've heard you a few times, and welcome to everyone. And I just want to, the bit